harvesting, cutting, stripping, stinging, retting, wetting, dewing, stinging, wringing, stinging, stripping, stinging, retting, wetting, dewing, stinging, wringing, stinging, stripping, stinging.
Well, we came one Easter, and it had been a particularly wonderful spring, and we hated the idea of going back to London. And so we got there just about in time for tea, and we saw lots of smoke coming up out of the middle. We found our way into a courtyard, and what was very odd was that there was nobody there. It was all just full of objects. There was a foreground, great big chair, a sort of king's chair, and sitting in his sleep was a man with very white hair. It was really blonde, but it looked very white blonde. And as we walked into the courtyard, a very resonant voice said, "Hello, can I help you?" And we walked over, and there was John Wolseley, who was having his afternoon nap, which he always had. And then he said, "I think you've come to stay, haven't you?" And I said, "Well, I don't know. It's all a bit of a mix-up." And he said, "Well, it'd be good if we find a room for you." And so he took us to the side of the courtyard, and there was a rather disgusting pot of food boiling on the side. He said, "Oh yes, we've got lunch." And so we sat down and we had lunch. They came for tea and stayed forever.
This exhibition is called Coming for Tea and Staying Forever. That's exactly what happened to me. I came in 1968. I fled the whole revolution in Paris. An English boy, we both fled, eloped really. And we left the mom and we crossed England and we found Philip on Exmoor in Brandon. Philip said, "I have a vague cousin who lives around here. Shall we go and meet him?" Which we did. And that was John Wolseley. And the rest is history, really. Because we both completely fell for the place. And John said in his way, which at that point I didn't realize, having just arrived from France, that English people don't always mean what they say. He did say, "Stay forever." But then I didn't get on with the English boy I had come with anymore. I didn't want him to be there anymore. So he left, but I stayed on. And then I went back to France, but came back to England and never left again. So that was in 1969.
I saw the advert in the newspaper and I read this. It said, "Dower House in secluded valley, Exmoor National Park, overlooks 18th century pleasure grounds on old country estate. Sleep 7, large kitchen, 2 receptions, etc. Gardens, shops and sea 3 miles. Taunton Railway 16 miles. Possible studio stroke workshop, available April." I'm not going to give you the rent. And then there was a phone number to ring. And they used to advertise in the local newspaper and I think also in the Times Literary Supplement.
August.
What was it like arriving at Nettlecombe in August 1977?
It was amazing. It was amazing, yeah. It's a waking dream.
Scutching, splitting, stripping, breaking, crushing, stripping, snapping, snapping, booning, stripping, splitting, snapping, scutching, 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 booning, splitting, stripping.
Why is Nettlecombe called Nettlecombe? We really don't know. But nettles, you have to think of them as, essential part of human habitation, really. But I think, at that time, there were nettles. Nettles needed lots of nutrient. They need nitrogen, phosphorus, and they just grow in these places where there is plenty of those. Well, humans produce those. So when you look at the sort of the pollen record of nettles, it increased hugely with the coming of, Neolithic farmers. So once people were settled, that's when the nettles exploded. So it's so funny that they're such a dominant part of our landscape, but we associate them with stings and, we really think of them as wicked things. But of course, we have always used them, so they've been a really important part of diet, a part of dyeing, a part of brewing, as we looked up. And how did we discover to use them? Well, that's a very interesting thing about early people. You only had to drop some in a pot and then they tasted really good.
Rubbing, softening, scraping, scuffing, rubbing, slivering, thinning, drawing, scuffing, thinning, scuffing, rubbing.
We lived in the courtyard in what's always been known as Triggles, which was after somebody who was a former employee of Nettlecombe Estate. I'm not sure exactly what their job was. You'd have stayed in various granaries when we were coming for weekends and woken up to the sun streaming in through the windows. And then eventually the house where we grew up then permanently came available to rent, and we stayed there as tenants for a bit, and then John Wolseley just said, would you like to buy it? And so I've lived there probably since I was 10, so that was 1974. And the country dance print was made in 1976, and it's part of a portfolio called For John Constable. It's this very Constable scene with this hay wain in the background, but that is actually set against a real place, which is the home farm of Nettlecombe. And in front of it, there are dancing these figures, this sort of bucolic party atmosphere. And in the background, on top of the hay wain, there are the actual people who did work on the farm. There was a guy called Jack Tucker, who was the farm manager, I think. And I do remember those kind of haymaking events, because in time-honoured tradition, we would go up and kind of help. But then there were these sort of towny artists who would be coming and helping. The bales were really small and rectangular at that point. And I remember them going up onto, a trailer like that. It was a very rickety, like a little sort of escalator. They went tick-a-tick-a-tick-a-tick-a-tick, and then they went pop into the top of the truck or the trailer, whatever it was. I remember it being printed by Lizzie Cox in the courtyard with my dad on the old presses there.
I mean, that press, it was sort of, this amazing bit of cast iron industry, really, with this incredible eagle on the top and a great handle that you pulled. And him and Lizzie doing I remember them proofing the different separations of the print, actually, and then then them all coming together. But so I particularly remember sort of going, "Ooh, what's that? Oh, that's that's that colour that's just been done on that wood card."
Twisting, turning, twisting, twining, twisting, turning, stringing, twisting, spinning, warping, winding, spinning, twisting, turning.
So you go into the studio, and the first thing you hit is the woodworking shop, and there are sort of rows of chisels and big wooden mallets, and a very pitted sort of workbench with a quite heavy vice on it, and there used to be a big bandsaw that he would use for cutting things up. That was always, like any woodworking shop, it's always the smell of sawdust, and and that sort of there's a particular sound of a bandsaw, which is a sort of, all the one that he had, there was never particularly smooth, so you have the sound of it cutting, but you'll always be a slight sort of clanking somewhere in the mechanism. But also the studio was always filled with the smell of wood smoke from his fire. So, you know, the studio was a sort of a comfortable place of smells and warmth and colour. And he was listening to some music often and would have breaks and play music sit and play something on guitar, or, you know, and you can tell from his work, there's nothing sort of austere or forbidding about his work. And his studio wasn't austere or forbidding. It was a place of serious work and application and thought, but it was friendly. There was no sort of sense of the artist in a sort of you know, cut off from society and other people, because I think his work was all about people, actually, and joy, really. I think in many ways, I mean, country dance is about that, and it's idyllic without being cute.
Roping, braiding, stranding, cording, forming, braiding, roping, plaiting, cording, braiding, stranding, cording, forming.
So the figures
plaiting,
in the print are, there's my mum and dad centrally, and our dog Spike, Spiky Thistle, he was called Spiky. I think that it's Pat Wolseley kind of hoiking up her skirt and dancing with the black top. There is Laurie Fricker, who was a landscape architect and tutor at Portsmouth School of Art, who had come out to Somerset as an evacuee. So I think he's second from the right in a suit, raising his arm up in the air. I think on the very far right, there's a woman with long hair and a man doing amazing dancing, which is Tad Manjay, the woodcarver, who lives still in Willerton, and that was his partner at the time, Val. There were other people living at Nettlecombe at the time. Marcia, who took really beautiful photographs of the animals, and the Lizzie Cox with her Morris Minor in the courtyard. How do you think the country dance print sums up the feeling at the time of all the friends coming?
Well, I suppose it was the 70s, and lots was going on. It was the end of... people were having a miserable time. And also it was all involved in a sort of quite strong political thing to do with finance, which is why a lot of people came to the country, because they thought that if they didn't get out, they'll be got at. And so they found whatever way they could to come and have a different life.
But in the background, you know, there was this ordinary farming going on, which was the tenant farmer. So that's the kind of backdrop of it. And it seems sad, but actually it was kind of fitting, I would say, and reassuring to Alex that just before he died, and he knew that he wasn't going to be around much longer, he said, "I'll be in the picture," because his grave is in the churchyard at the corner of the drive going into Nettlecombe, and if you stand there, you see this scene, maybe a slightly different angle on it, but it's been so much sort of part of the entrance to Nettlecombe, and now that's where his resting place is.
Uses of nettles. Nettle tops eaten in the spring consume the phlegmatic excess of the body that the coldness and moistness of winter leaves behind. Take 3 meals of boiled nettles in the month of March to clear the blood. Eat 3 feed of boiled nettles in the springtime and it will keep you free of disease for the rest of the year. Drink water from boiled nettles or eat young nettle leaves to boost blood iron. Eat boiled nettle tips in spring as a tonic.
It was good. They were great days. You know, we had some fantastic parties. I mean, May Day, we were in the courtyard. We'd always put up a pole. You know, Alex's famous painting, the party. You know,
the country dance.
The country dance, yeah. Well, that's the sort of thing it was. Yeah, that's exactly what it was. It's a painting of that. When we were all sort of dancing around, and we'd put up a pole and just put loads of straw bales all around and just have a big party, and we'd all sort of dress up in a sort of old time country stuff sort of thing.
I remember the May Day celebration very well. I was 10, and I remember particularly that I was 10 because we had to wear these Victorian smocks and mob caps, which were very roughly made out of just sort of sheeting, and they'd been dyed. There was yellow and there was blue. The colour wasn't very strong. I remember it being quite wishy-washy, and it had just been done. A whole bunch of blue stuff had been done and a whole bunch of yellow stuff had been done. And I remember my mum, who's always been amazing at making things with flowers, Geraldine, and she got this lovely plant that I've always been trying to find again, and I think it was called pennywort, and it grows in strings with these little things like pennies that go down it, and she wove a beautiful crown, and it was put on the head of this beautiful woman who wasn't someone who was in Nettlecombe. She was a person locally, but she'd been chosen to be the May Queen because she was really beautiful. And then she had this seat that she sat in. Then we did do maypole dancing. I feel that we didn't know what at all we were doing, but we were taught how to do some version of maypole dancing, and I remember rehearsing that. And looking at it, it makes me think we all look like crazy pre-Raphaelites trying to go back to this original way of living. And I think that there was a feeling of that. And from my point of view as a child, it didn't seem pretentious. It just seemed quite natural, and people were just enjoying themselves, and people loved dressing up. There was loads of dressing up always.
I can remember I'd been working. It was a Saturday, well, it was a Friday or a Saturday. I'm pretty sure it was a Saturday, and I'd been working here, and I went home and I went to the Valiant Soldier in Roadwater, which is say 4 miles that way, easy. 4.5 miles. Anyway, I got there and I seen these people. I thought, God blimey, I saw you lot earlier down Nettlecombe. And they were students from Bar Ashton. One of them, she comes to me and she goes, excuse me, you don't know the way to Nettlecombe, do you? And I said, yeah, I do. It's that way. They had no torches, no nothing. Proper city people, I tell you. Relying on streetlights and renting. And I said, yeah, it's that way. So I actually walked them all the way to the top of the Grove, which is up here. And said, straight down through there and you can't miss it. Yeah, miles out my way, really.
An enduring memory of being at Nettlecombe growing up was the amount of people that were always coming and going, how engaging they were as adults to young people. Really patient and very interested in whatever rubbish I had to say, because they were all very interesting and engaged people generally. So I just thought that was normal. I remember being in the bathroom of our house, the corner loft, being downstairs in the bathroom, watching a performer, watching him shave his head.
He lived in Australia.
He lived in Australia, that's it, he was Australian. Watching him shave his head and cover it with red glitter, which a box of which I had for about 25 years.
And
there was a stage set up in the courtyard, wasn't there?
Yeah, and he came out of a box out in the darkness, and he just came and suddenly lit up with all this glitter. It was completely magic.
And he
had it on his tongue.
He had red glitter all over his tongue.
So yeah, it is special. You do have a love affair with it. And that wane, that does that thing where it ebbs and flows. So it's interesting. It is, because you have times where you're just like, oh my God, this place is so annoying. And then other times when it's just wonderful. It was recorded as semi-derelict, listed as semi-derelict when we moved in. So then we moved in and set to work, making it be presentable. Tommy's dad, he used to describe it as, I always thought that Triggles was a home for a toad. That's what he said about our house. And he's right, actually, it is quite damp.
Nettles boiled and the resultant liquid drunk is a cure for lily rash, the result of juice from the daffodil family, making sore and itching fingers. This is usually when the skin is irritated from either picking or packing flowers during the season for market. Tips of young stinging nettles when boiled and eaten cure rashes and allergies.
I used to feel when I came back to England that Nettlecombe was my root, which I don't feel so much anymore. I don't really care so much about roots anymore. But that was this sort of beating heart the moment I started on the bump road and coming home, which was such a strange feeling, really. I still love it, but not in that sort of way anymore. But it's still very important for me. Well, it's very special, but at the same time, I always think it's a vampire. I think it just draws you in. And when I lived there for longer times, there are times you can't bear it. You have to get out. And so it has this amazing beauty. It's so stunningly beautiful, I think. But also, it's very powerful, and you have to be careful, which I hadn't realized at first. But then the more I think about it, and lots of people go a bit mad there as well, actually. And you have to escape. You can be there and use it and enjoy all this beauty, but you have to be aware of it. You have to leave at times, you really do. And I used to, because when I first came, I wasn't much of a walker or anything, but when I lived in Triggles, I would go up on the top of the grove where all the oak trees are and look at the sea, and it was absolutely crucial to do that. So it is in the valley, which does sort of boom, it takes you, I feel. And so I always find that Nettlecombe is the two-edged sword, really.
That's how I remember Nettlecombe, is that it was all quite organic. Everything that happened was an organic thing that just happened because of the people and the landscape and the space and the place.
Yes, and who came.
And there's the strong thread of multi-generational friendship.
Yeah.
Which still continues on and on and on now, doesn't it? That's what was really... It was all grown there.
Yeah.
Because it was a place that people could return to in the way that we still return now.
Yeah.
Full of memories.
But when they were here, it wasn't like they were making art with the idea of the audience. They were just... Maybe that was a really good thing about here. And I see that about my dad's work more and more. That he was making the work for himself and not thinking about as an audience, and he was just really authentically recording his experiences of living here and his ideas. And he'd always say, I'm doing this thing at the moment, but what I really want to do is get onto the next thing, because that's the thing I really want to do right now. So there was this constant stream of ideas, and my mum as well.
You get here and you're cut off, really. You're in the zone, you really are. Nothing can sort of interrupt. We came here about 15 years ago. I moved down here from Farnham in Surrey. People gravitated towards it, and all sorts of people seem to live here. And I've met people as I've gone through my life here, and so often they'll come to, oh yes, I used to live at Nettlecombe, just for a short while maybe. But I came across it because I'd walked around here with the children, and when I came down here to live on my own, I was looking for studio space, so I thought, well, I wonder if is there anything there? And so here we are. I look up, look through that arch, and I just see hills, and look, just that little view through the archway. It's the hills, I think. They're so sudden. I mean, of course, Nettlecombe, being in a combe, you've got the hills rising up all around you, haven't you? So you feel sort of held in the landscape somehow or the other. So it's kind of cosy. It's not exactly a sort of a barren, scary place. It's a very comfortable place to be.
Well, it's quiet and peaceful. A lot of people that do come here probably aren't born here. So they've come from the city, it's bloody smoky, fumes. But I've got what they want.
Nettles, Urtica dioica, Hegbeg, Higgity-Piggity, Hokey-Pokey, Devil's Plant, Devil's Leaf, Burnweed, Burn Hazel, Tanging Nettle, Bull Nettle, Jenny Nettle, Cool Fowl, Devil's Guts, Devil's Leaf, Devil's Plaything, Ettle, Female Nettle, Hitty Titty, Hokey Pokey, Indian Spinach, Ivor's Daughter, Ginny Nettle, Naughty Man's Plaything, Never Trust Me, Scaddy, Stingers, Tanging Nettle, Tanging Nettle.
Yes, well, to me, it's pretty obvious that the place is full of nettles, because it was also probably built on a settlement.
Brambles everywhere, and calling this place Nettlecombe, it's aptly named, isn't it? But it equally could have been Bramblecombe or Thistlecombe, actually, couldn't it?
People used to wonder what was going on, didn't they? Can you say how they used to wonder what was going on at Nettlecombe? What did they used to say?
Yes, we noticed that if there'd been any trouble, like loud music, that would suddenly be a noise demand of a young policeman who'd been detailed out from the local place. They came up because they realised there was a party at Nettlecombe, and that they'd been detailed to come and see what was going. But we never got charged for anything. And in fact, they went away saying, "We'll see you later, sir." Not even do a report.
Oh yeah, the locals, to them, Nettlecombe was this sort of, I suppose you'd call it, den of iniquity, where there's all sorts going on. But yeah, people, that's what happens in the countryside. You get a little germ of something that happens, and then one person relates it to another, then to another, but it just changes as it goes along, So I was always saying, no, it's not like that. So these are just ordinary people, maybe slightly different from you, just living their life up at this nice place and trying to get on with their artwork and whatever. I think Martin was about 15 and I was 17, and we were like young guys, young lads who got fascinated by this place, We sort of walked around the periphery at night looking down, because back then it was like in the 60s, it was an artist commune. John and Alex, they met in London through the art world, and then John decided he wanted to set up this artist commune, and this is what they did, and that was in the 60s. Of course, me and Martin, as the local young teenager, were fascinated by all this. So of local people, me and Martin were the first. And of course, because we're local, then our mates would start coming here with it, so it all sort of opened it up a bit, really.
So in the 1970s, there was a community farm here for a few years. And can you tell me about that, what that was like?
Yes, everyone wanted 3 of everything, like the Ark. There had to be one for Mummy and Daddy and one for a spare. I know you've been hearing about spares lately, but it's quite good to have an extra one. Well, we had all the normal animals, except we decided that it would be good to have a rather archaic mixture, because we were really going back to farming on a very early idea. You didn't have anything that couldn't keep itself alive, so you couldn't have
lots of big flocks of things, you're thinking, or...
Yes, we couldn't really cope with herds. And we had a system where we looked after animals together, so that there happened to be 4 women who suddenly and surprisingly found themselves completely looking after all the animals, which was terribly boring, but is very much the way things were. We were really self-sufficient as long as we could have the Marmite. We had goats, which were quite sweet in a sort of ridiculous way, and they were constantly eating people's clothes. They actually ate a whole tree once, which was very special, magnolia tree. But on the whole, they were quite easy to milk, as long as you gave them something nice to eat.
It felt like this self-sufficiency thing went on for years and years, but I don't think it can have done, and somebody will know how long it went on for. But it was lovely. We got to feed all the chickens and the ducks and go and collect the eggs, and there were piglets being born. There was a pig called Henrietta who had 13 piglets, and she was in the bit of land opposite my dad's studio, which was a kind of piggery at that point. We had goats. There was a peacock, which John got, and then it annoyed everyone so much that I think he released it onto Exmoor somewhere. All the chickens were very strange, little rare breed ones with little bantams with funny little hats. There was one called Mrs. Pepperpot. She had a funny little hat on. It looked like she was wearing a feather hat. Very, very sweet.
We kept pigs for several years, and we had a boar and 2 sows, and the boar was kept in the top walled garden. And we called it Honeymoon Land, because one of the sows would be in with him and the other one would come away from him and go and have her piglets in a different field, and then we'd swap them over. And the sows were kept in the top, where the container is now in the new orchard. They were kept up there.
I remember a classic Nettlecombe gathering of that time, where we were having roast lamb for Easter lunch, and all the people in the commune and in the valley, just the Nettlecombe immediate buildings, came and had this Easter lunch together. And I think it was outside, and we all sat down in the sun, and then we started eating the lamb, all us kids and everybody. And then John Wolseley said, "Well, I'd just like to raise a toast to Skipperty, who'd been our pet lamb, and doesn't he taste delicious?" And we all burst into tears and ran off from the table. It's like we've just been eating our lovely pet that we've bottle fed.
We had this Oxford Sandy Blacks, which we did with a whole load. That was the first lot we did, which was It was Oxford Sandy Blacks, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And that was with all of us as a project, and that was okay. They were a bit fat and they were very naughty and they used to escape a lot. And then we had some Gloucester Old Spots, they were lovely. I have fond memories of them being asleep under the apple trees. So that was really nice. And we had sheep as well. And then I went through a phase of sheep. I've had some chickens. So I enjoyed the sheep. I really enjoyed having the sheep.
The use of nettles to treat rheumatic and similar pains is extremely widespread. Nettles must be applied to the affected parts. Nettles infused are good for rheumatism. Pull a bunch of nettles and get a friend to hit your back with them to help your arthritis. Cure a frozen shoulder with nettles put on bare skin. Dry nettles and burn them in a closed room over hot embers. Breathing the pungent aroma will relieve bronchitis and asthma.
Everybody was
attacks.
kind of playing at farming.
Nettle
Lots of
tea
things
is
didn't
good
work
for
very
asthma
well.
and chest complaints
I
and blood
remember them
disorders.
curing their own bacon. There's a chimney in the kind of old groom's tack room in between the stables and the courtyard, and they smoked bacon up the chimney, but it just went so rock hard and it was so salty. But we ate all these things because that's what we were eating. They made various different kinds of cheese. They even made butter. The goat milk was our milk that we had, and we really didn't like it because it was kind of really goaty and it was always a bit warm. But my mum always said, I tried to make it really cold and nice for you. But that is a slightly bad memory of my childhood, is like, oh, this really strong goaty milk. They grew loads of vegetables. We did, at one point, they were completely self-sufficient apart from sugar. They just made everything. They just tried everything. It did take a lot of time. And I think it was the women who did really most of that. And it was this time of everybody going out of the cities. Lots of people went to Wales. But it was definitely a conscious decision and a sort of movement that they were part of. Because at the time, they were worried that there was going to be an energy crisis. And there were power cuts, I remember in my London childhood. And people thought, maybe a bit like they do at the moment with the climate emergency, they thought we've got to have a backup. We're going to have to learn how to do this. And later on, there was another oil crisis. And I remember my dad going and buying some bicycles because he said we're going to need to get around and we'll have to cycle. And I think that on a serious note, there was an anxiety that if you lived in the country, you could probably be all right because they'd been through the war and they'd been through rationing. It was like a funny merging of their upbringing, their post-war rationing experience, which they would have both remembered very well, and then merging with this slightly alternative lifestyles, 1970s hippie commune thing. And I thought that some of the people who drifted through, they did seem to just trip around a bit, and the women were really doing all the work. And there were a few people who obviously thought, oh, that's a good place, I just kind of go and hang out there for a bit, and didn't do much and were quite annoying. So it wasn't all just rosy, there would have been some tensions of people not pulling their weight.
Yeah, farming. I was born farmer's son. My grandfather worked for the estate. I worked on the estate one day a week with Pat, planting trees. We planted oak, ash and cherry up in, I think we started in Kingswood, then we went to the parks, the one below, and then we done Sticklepath Wood, and then we done a little bit of Pookwood as well. We used to get there in the morning, make a fire, and have a cup of tea, and then we used to go off planting. We're planting all day, and then we stopped dinner time, and basically it was sort of like replanting. Wherever there was a place to replant, you replant. But I know, like some of the trees up here, up the Grove, they're old.
This valley, which is really ancient valley, as most valleys are, but we have remnants of the sort of ancient situation here. So we have these huge old oak trees. The living ones are probably 200 plus. I've actually measured it, counting the growth rings. But some of them are even older, and it goes back to a time when people were first arriving in this valley. So it must have looked such a wonderful valley with huge old oak trees and a stream. You needed water, and open bits as well, which were grazed by deer and things, by wild animals.
I was talking with Pat, and she said about the oaks. We have these 300 or 400 veteran oaks, Quercus petraea, sessile oaks, and they are very well known, going right back to Sir Walter Raleigh's day. He was involved with this estate with planting trees, and that goes back to for hundreds of years. They were grown as a crop, albeit it took a long time to come to fruition, and the oaks would have been used obviously in building, but especially shipbuilding. What she used to do was just collect a few acorns off the trees, because she knew all about the trees. She's done a lot of research and written about them and stuff. So I got interested in this, doing bits and pieces of work and wanting to get into forestry sort of work. And so that was then when I started bringing around the tree nurseries. And the provenance is the most important thing, So if I collect acorns and send them up to Scotland to a specialist tree nursery, and it's like I've always said to people, I'm not big in myself. I'm just a giant squirrel collecting acorns. The clever people at the nurseries, they plant them and grow trees with them. But someone has to collect the seed. They call it a mast, the amount of acorns that the oak trees provide each year. And if you have a good mast or a good amount of acorns, like last year I collected 3 tons. I have to get there before they come down, clear under the trees, whatever that takes. And I'm very fortunate as well, because I know every tree on the estate now. I call them my friends, I love them, Well, they've been giving me a living all these years. The first one to drop almost every year is at the bottom of the grove. And that one is my indicator. When that starts dropping, then I know, right, I'm collecting now, because that's the first one. And I'm very fortunate the oaks here are veteran oaks, because it is pretty much mainly veteran oaks I collect under. They have the decency to, they do it in sequence, that I'm underneath one collecting, and by the time I've finished collecting that, the next one is dropping, and I'm working my way around the estate. Right until recently, I could pretty much guarantee I had to be ready to start collecting the last week of September. That's when the acorns will start coming. That's when the first tree will drop, the last day of September, pretty much every year, that would be when I'd be starting. That has now moved forward. It's nearly the beginning of September. So it's moved forward, 3 weeks a month. And that's climate change, it's just climate change has caused that, obviously. And a number of times, even, farmers, think they come along and say, "You're a Bins, what the bloody hell are you doing there?" And I say, "Collecting acorns." "Yeah, but what do you want to leave?" I said, "Well, what do you think?" And you won't believe the amount of people that don't get it. And these are farming people. And I said, "I don't know, feed to the pigs." Obviously hundreds and hundreds of people have spoken to me about it. And when I just say to people, "Well, why do you think I'm collecting acorns?" Very few people turn around and say, to grow trees, to plant them and grow trees. They come up with all sorts of things,
Because that's why I'd originally gone. I'd read about Nettlecombe trees in a book that I got from the library in Hammersmith. I thought the oaks were just the most extraordinary thing, going up the grove and just being with them looking up and seeing a tree of trees, like each bough looks like a complete tree, doesn't it? The power of that, those trees that have seen the Civil War and beyond.
Boil down nettles to make a spring tonic. Then every morning, drink a wineglassful before breakfast to lower your blood pressure.
So Nettlecombe was, it has a sense of freedom about it as a place, I think. But maybe that's the way with sort of slightly crumbling estates. I can't ever imagine Nettlecombe being extremely pristine, and there's too much rain and mud, and it's a West Somerset valley, and even when there were probably gardeners tending the grounds the whole time and all of that sort of thing, I don't see it as being like some sort of extraordinary ornamental estate that sort of, I'm sure it was always a bit wild. But whenever I hear a rook, I think of Nettlecombe, because the sound of Nettlecombe for me is the rookeries and wood pigeons. So that's sort of, but then en masse, and then just occasionally a sort of.
Dry nettles and burn them in a closed room over hot embers. Breathing the pungent aroma will relieve bronchitis and asthma attacks. Nettle tea is good for asthma and chest complaints and blood disorders. It's made and drunk for stomach complaints. Nettles is a popular remedy for arthritis, gout, hay fever and fluid retention. It's valuable for supporting healthy hair, skin and nail tissue.
My connection with this place is my family has owned it for quite a few hundred years. And I suppose something significant about it is that it's never been sold, this valley. So by inheritance from cousins and etc. Since 1230, I think, which sounds like a, time of day actually, but it also sounds monumental. But of course, all of that comes down to the present at the end of the day and how we look back at that. Although it looks like a sort of edifice of history, its defining characteristic really is that it's managed to change and occupy different roles over that period. And I think that's significant in the present about what happens to it now.
Nettles picked on a Saturday lose their medicinal properties, and holding a nettle leaf in the mouth cures toothache. Nettles are believed to break spells and curses used in protective charms. Carrying nettles in the pocket attracts money and good fortune.
The current chunk of time I would probably put in one way as post-First World War. So it existed within a certain social level of privilege and disparity between rich and poor. And also there's a litany of historical, shall we say, difficult issues. And so we were involved in tin mining in Cornwall. And we've also been involved with slavery, which we're just trying to tackle now. And in fact, some of my family have gone over to Grenada, where we had an interest in some of the plantations, and formally apologised, trying to take responsibility for our part in that and what we can do for that in the present.
Nettles have the power to bring rain and are used in rain-making ceremonies. Brushing hair with a bunch of nettles is believed to make it grow faster and stronger. Farmers use nettles to protect their livestock from evil spirits and to promote good health.
People, place, knowledge is our sort of current line, guiding line. So how to get people here, invest in the place and knowledge. So one of the projects is working with Geoffrey Hart for the Nettlecombe Craft School. He's built a barn up in the woods where he's going to teach green woodworking and heritage craft skills.
We are stood in the Nettlecombe Craft School, which is a roundwood timber-framed open-sided barn, soon to be filled with lots of people practicing crafts and learning crafts, focused on traditional green woodworking skills predominantly, so that's spoon carving, bowl turning, basket making, and a whole load of other interesting sort of woodland-based crafts. And the idea is to sort of use the products of the woodland in terms of timber, but also I see it as giving people access to this space, this woodland space.
The other side that shouldn't be underestimated is the Field Study Centre, which is what's taken over the main house for the last 50 years. And that teaches kids from all over Britain environmental education. So an awful lot of field trips from GCSEs and A-levels and universities. And I don't think I've been anywhere in the world where I haven't actually bumped into somebody who's been to the Field Study Centre. My most extreme example was going on a bush taxi through the Kalahari and sitting next to somebody who ended up telling me that he'd been to Nettlecombe, at which point I gave up. That is a huge social benefit, and my parents arranged that, and that's been a hugely beneficial thing.
That's actually one of the things I love about being here, is that just every now and then someone will randomly pop up and you won't know who they are, and they'll go, I used to live here in this era, and then they'll recount some stories and then they'll disappear again. And it happens all the time. It's clear like this place has had such an impact on so many people. People randomly pop up and I say, I'm at Nettlecombe, and they're like, I was there doing a this and this course, or in this era I was there, or sort of a special place, I think.
We're not necessarily much more interesting than any other community, but they are still those stories. And that is an important bit about privilege, social privilege, that has been deemed worthy of recording, and still is. And I hope to take responsibility for that. And that relates to thinking of it as a sort of special place or another place. And there's stories in both of those directions. Well, I suppose it's a more interesting story to be a special place, but actually it's a collection of circumstance at different times.